It was 8:07 p.m. when the red and blue lights splashed across my front porch. Two deputies stepped out of their cruisers with hands hovering near their holsters. I hadn't even turned off my truck after a 10-hour drive from Denver when the shouting started. "Officers, arrest him now. He's trespassing." The voice cut through the humid Georgia night like a chainsaw. A woman in a tailored navy suit marched up the gravel path heels, clicking with the authority of someone who thought she owned the entire county. Her name, as I'd soon learn, was Victoria Pratt, the self-proclaimed queen of the Willow Oaks HOA. The irony, I wasn't trespassing. This land had belonged to my family since 1958. The old farmhouse behind me wasn't just a property, it was my inheritance, my sanctuary. But Victoria didn't care. She had two cops on her side, a clipboard full of HOA bylaws, and the smug certainty of someone who had ruined lives before breakfast. What she didn't know, what no one here knew, was that I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the man who could dismantle her entire empire with a single phone call. The deputies didn't move right away. Their eyes flicked between Victoria and me, weighing the situation. I kept my hands visible, palms open, because nothing escalates faster than a jittery officer and a confusing story. "Evening, officers," I said calmly, forcing the road fatigue out of my voice. "This is my family's property. My name's Ethan Cross. I can show you the deed right now." The younger deputy, a kid who looked barely old enough to rent a car, shined his flashlight across my face. "Sir, we got a report of a possible break-in." "You got ID?" Before I could answer, Victoria barged between us like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. "He doesn't belong here. This is HOA-governed land, and I've never seen him in 20 years as president. That alone is probable cause for trespass. Read your bylaws." Her confidence was bulletproof, and judging by the deputy's uneasy glance, this wasn't her first rodeo. I could practically hear the gavel banging in her head, convicting me before sunrise. Slowly, I pulled my phone from my pocket, swiping to the folder labeled Property Docs. Years in federal compliance taught me never to travel without backup files. I handed the screen to the senior deputy Rodriguez, according to his badge. His eyes scanned the digital deed, his frown deepening with every line. "This all checks out, ma'am," Rodriguez said finally, his voice flat. "Cross families own this parcel since 1958. It's not under HOA jurisdiction." The look on Victoria's face could have curdled milk. She smiled, but her eyes, oh, those eyes burned with the kind of fury that doesn't die overnight. "Officers, I strongly urge you to verify the boundary surveys. There have been discrepancies. For all we know, Mr. Cross is squatting on common ground." Rodriguez's patience was thinning. "Without a court order or evidence of a crime, there's nothing we can do. Mr. Cross, you're free to go about your evening." He tipped his hat, then both cruisers rolled away their taillights, disappearing into the night. That's when Victoria stepped closer, her perfume cloying in the humid air. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper only I could hear. 22 years ago, your father ruined everything," she hissed. "We were going to build a resort, transform this useless dirt into something real. But oh no, Samuel Cross had to play savior. He rallied the county against us. My father lost his business, his name, his life." Her painted smile returned bright and poisonous. "Now it's your turn. 72 hours, Ethan. Sell or I will bury you in violation so deep you'll beg me for mercy." Her heels clicked away like a countdown clock, leaving me rooted in the gravel, a storm raging in my chest. My father's voice echoed in my memory, his last letter, warning me about wolves in nice clothes. I finally understood. Inside the farmhouse, the air smelled like cedar and ghosts. I dropped my bag and collapsed into the chair by the window, staring at the land that held 3 generations of sweat and sacrifice. It wasn't just property, it was legacy, bloodlines etched in soil, and no HOA dictator was going to rip it from me. I opened my laptop, fingers flying over the keys. My professional life had been all subpoenas and oversight committees, 15 years dismantling corrupt HOA boards from behind a desk in DC. They called me the closer. Now the war had come home, and Victoria Pratt had no idea who she just declared war on. I typed one line in bold across a blank page, day 1. The Willow Oaks war begins. Sleep didn't come that night. At dawn, the first shot landed. It started with the crunch of tires on gravel. I opened the door to find a blaze of orange paper carpeting my porch, 47 violation notices. I counted twice because disbelief is stubborn before caffeine. Grass height exceeds HOA maximum by 0.75 inches. Mailbox color does not match approved pallet. Unauthorized vehicle parked after 10 p.m. Outdoor coffee mug visible fine $300. I laughed. Actually laughed because it was either that or put my fist through the siding. She'd been here all night crawling over my land with a measuring tape like some deranged Santa Claus. But the last envelope wasn't orange. It was cream-colored heavy with my name written in looping cursive that practically dripped malice. Inside, Ethan, consider this your welcome packet. The Cross family's immunity ended when your father died. You have 70 hours left. I have buyers lined up with cash above market. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, VP. The postscript froze my blood. PS. Judge Whitaker sends his regards. I knew that name. Whitaker had danced around federal investigations 3 times dirty as a septic tank, but slippery enough to stay robed. If Victoria had him in her pocket, this wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was organized, systemic. Before I could process, my phone buzzed with a local number. A trembling voice spilled out the second I answered. Mr. Cross. My name's Linda Barrett. I live 2 houses down. I saw the notices. Please, you need to listen. She won't stop. Not until you're gone. 10 minutes later, Linda stood in my kitchen clutching a bulging manila folder like contraband. I've been documenting everything, she whispered, eyes darting toward the windows. Inside were photos of vandalized gardens, spreadsheets of fines, copies of foreclosure filings. Tom Bradley lost his house over a bird feeder. A bird feeder. And that's not the worst. Pets disappear, tires get slashed, gardens poisoned. But somehow there's never proof. Her hands shook as she slid a thumb drive across the table. 2 years of hell, Mr. Cross. You're the first person who might actually stop her. I promised her I would. Then I sat there staring at the mountain of evidence, feeling something deep and dangerous settle in my gut. This wasn't just a fight for my land. It was a crusade. By the time Linda slipped back through the woods like a fugitive, the sun had climbed high over willow oaks, turning the red clay roads into shimmering ribbons of heat. I sat at the farmhouse table surrounded by violation slips, half-drunk coffee, and a growing sense that this was bigger than one woman's grudge. Then came the sound that would mark the next escalation, the metallic ping of a text message. Unknown number. Saw you talking to the Barrett woman. Nosy neighbors tend to have accidents. TikTok 46 hours. I stared at the words until my pulse slowed from a sprint to a steady drumbeat of fury. Whoever sent it, Victoria or one of her enforcers, was sloppy enough to leave a digital trail. Rookie mistake. But before I could start tracing, the number movement caught my eye. A golf cart barreled down the road, dust curling behind it like a tail. Behind the wheel, Victoria, in her battle uniform, crisp khakis, HOA logo polo, and a visor worth more than my truck tires. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, stepping out with the deliberate calm of a predator that knows the cage door is locked. Mr. Cross, she said, voice honeyed with malice. I see you've begun addressing your violations. How proactive. Though as president, I should remind you that any modifications require approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Next meeting is in 6 weeks. Her grin widened. I straightened tape measure still in hand. Funny thing about measurements, Victoria. They change depending on who's holding the tape. According to mine, this mailbox is exactly within regulation. Her eyes glinted. Are you implying I falsified documents? I'm stating facts, I replied evenly. And wondering how you managed to measure my grass at 2 in the morning. Night vision ruler, the smile faltered. Just for a heartbeat. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice until her words slid like knives under the ribs. You think you're clever, just like your daddy. Her tone curdled bitter as spoiled cream. He thought he could outplay us too until the stress killed him. Weak hearts run in your family, Ethan. Might want to watch that. The world tilted. My father's sudden death 5 years back, a massive heart attack, had haunted me in quiet moments. And now this woman was practically spitting on his grave. I clenched the tape measure so hard the metal bit into my palm. You have one chance, I said, my voice low and lethal. Cancel the violations, stop the harassment, or I'll do what I do best. She laughed sharp and delighted. What's that run crying to your government buddy, sweetheart Judge Whitaker eats men like you for breakfast? She turned her parting shot, tossed over one shoulder like perfume. 46 hours, Mr. Cross, then things get unpleasant. The golf cart vanished down the road, leaving behind the faint echo of tires and the stench of war. By sunset, I'd installed security cameras, 8 of them, high-def with night vision and cloud backup. Experience had taught me that tyrants don't just escalate, they mutate. And Victoria Pratt was evolving faster than a virus in a petri dish. The next morning, my paranoia paid off. I woke to silence. Too much silence. No bird song, no cicadas, just the faint hum of rot. When I stepped outside, the stench hit first bitter chemical, clinging to the back of my throat like poison. My grandmother's rose garden, the one she'd tended for 40 years, the one we buried her locket beneath, was dead. Not wilted, not thirsty, murdered. Every heritage bush reduced to blackened skeletons, soil slick with herbicide. I knelt, fingers digging into the earth, fury flooding every vein. This wasn't random vandalism. It was surgical, an attack aimed straight at the heart. Deputy Chen arrived an hour later, notebook in hand, eyes darting everywhere but my face. Mr. Cross, without evidence linking this to a specific party, it's vandalism by person unknown. I can file an insurance report. I didn't bother answering. Instead, I pulled up the camera feed on my laptop, heart pounding. There it was, 3:12 a.m. Clear as crystal, Robert Pratt, Victoria's husband, creeping across my lawn with a spray rig slung over his shoulder. But it was the audio that iced my blood. Remember, Victoria's voice crackled through his phone, speaker just the old roses, and wear the shoes I left 2 sizes bigger. No mistakes. The calculation of it, the precision, made me want to put my fist through something solid. Instead, I exported the clip twice, then saved it in 3 encrypted locations. For a long moment, I sat in my grandfather's leather chair, the smell of pipe tobacco rising like a ghost around me. I had choices, none of them good. Local law enforcement bought and paid for. Civil suit, slow death by paperwork, which left me the only option I trusted: burn it all down. Legally, methodically, publicly. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Elena Rivera, attorney Bulldog, and one of the few people alive who knew how deep my Rolodex ran. Ethan, she said, voice thick with sleep and suspicion. Tell me you're not about to start a war in rural Georgia? They killed my grandmother's roses, I said flatly. And that's not all. They just threatened me, using a sitting judge as backup. A pause, then a sigh that sounded like a woman holstering ethics for later. Send me everything, and Ethan. Be careful. Small-town politics make D.C. look like Sunday school. By noon, my evidence was uploading to 3 secure drives. While files transferred, I poured bourbon over ice and stared out the window at the ruin of what had once been beauty. That's when headlights swept across the yard. Dorothy Klein, age 71, widow and former PTA president, stood at my door, clutching a casserole like a shield. Figured you might not feel like cooking, she said, pushing past me without waiting for an answer. Her eyes landed on the blackened garden. Ah, she's escalating early this time. This time, I asked, shutting the door. Dorothy settled at the table like a queen reclaiming her throne. Your grandmother and I traded rose cuttings for 30 years. I've got some of hers still thriving in my greenhouse. You want them back? The offer nearly broke me. Instead, I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Dorothy patted my hand with fingers strong from decades of pulling weeds and pulling neighbors back from despair. That's what real community does, son. We protect our own. But Victoria, she doesn't stop. Not until you burn her empire to ash. I leaned in. Then tell me everything. And Dorothy did. By the time she left, the blueprint was forming in my head, exposed the rot flip her allies, and dragged Judge Whitaker into the sunlight he hated so much. But first I had to bait the trap, and tomorrow, the real war began. The night stretched long and sleepless, lit by the glow of my laptop, and the steady stream of strategy notes spilling from my head. Every move Victoria had made, the notices, the threats, the sabotage, pointed to something far bigger than bruised ego. This wasn't about grass height or mailbox colors. It was about control, power, and profit. Dorothy's stories confirmed it. Families driven out over fabricated violations, homes foreclosed and flipped for pennies, then sold to shell companies that all trace back to the same players. Victoria wasn't a petty tyrant. She was a crime boss with a manicure and an HOA logo. And Whitaker. He wasn't just an enabler, he was the engine. By sunrise, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a blunt instrument. What I needed was a scalpel. The first cut came at 7:03 a.m., when I made my presence impossible to ignore. Picture this me standing in the driveway with a tape measure, bright orange safety vest, and GoPro mounted to my chest. Every move live-streamed to a private channel feeding into cloud storage. The audience, Elena, two retired federal colleagues, and a cybersecurity analyst who owed me a favor. If Victoria wanted to play HOA theater, I was about to give her a front row seat. And like clockwork, she arrived golf cart humming like a wasp fury tucked behind a smile as brittle as glass. "Mr. Cross," she chirped, stepping onto my gravel drive as though it were her personal stage. "I see you're addressing those violations. Proactive homeowners are the backbone of our community." Her eyes flicked to the camera on my chest, calculating, then to the orange vest screaming official. I didn't bother looking up from the mailbox I was inspecting. "Actually, Victoria, I'm conducting an independent audit. Funny thing about bylaws, they're public record. And yours, they're riddled with non-compliance." Her smile thinned. "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation," I said, meeting her gaze. "One of many I'll be sharing at tomorrow's county meeting." She opened her mouth, probably to spit more poison, but my phone buzzed loudly in my pocket. I answered without breaking eye contact. "Ethan Cross," I said, voice clear for the mic. "Yes, Agent Monroe, I received your email. The Corruption Task Force has the files. Excellent. Tell the U.S. Attorney I'll have the supplemental evidence by Friday." Victoria froze. Just for a second. Then the mask slid back into place, tighter than ever. 42 hours, she said softly before pivoting on her heels and stalking back to the cart. The bluff had landed, and judging by the speed she tore out of my driveway, she was rattled. Good. But rattled predators are dangerous, and by that evening, she proved it. The attack came subtle at first, an email from an anonymous sender claiming to have compromising footage of me with a married neighbor. I deleted it without flinching. Amateurs forget, metadata tells no lies. 10 minutes later, a text from the same number: "Your career dies tomorrow. Sell now and walk away." I almost laughed. My career? Lady, I built careers, dismantling people like you. Then came the harder hit, my bank app flashing, account frozen. They'd filed an emergency injunction claiming I was operating an unlicensed business on HOA property. Cute, predictable, and utterly useless against the contingency fund I'd stashed in cryptocurrency years ago. Still, the move told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't waiting for her clock to run out. She was accelerating, which meant I had to hit her first and harder. That's when I changed the game. Instead of hiding, I went loud. Public. I created a Facebook group, Homeowners for Transparency. Willow Oaks seeded it with Linda and Dorothy and let their stories bloom like wildfire. Within hours, half the neighborhood was in posting photos of their own violation notices, swapping tales of harassment that read like war crimes for picket fences. By sunset, the group had 128 members, nearly every family Victoria claimed to represent. Screenshots of her late-night texts, copies of liens that smelled like forgery. One brave soul even posted a recording of her snarling about bleeding them dry until they begged to sell. The comment threads turned into battlefields. Some still defended her loyalists or maybe beneficiaries of her power, but most, they were waking up from the spell. At 9:17 p.m., my phone lit up with a private message. "Mr. Cross, you don't know me. Name's Robert Pratt. We need to talk. I can't keep covering for her anymore." Victoria's husband, the man I'd caught on camera torching my garden. If he was reaching out, something in their fortress had cracked. We met an hour later in the courthouse parking lot, neutral ground, where even Whitaker's reach had limits. Robert looked like a man drowning in his own choices, hollow-eyed hands trembling as he passed me a flash drive. "Years of recordings," he muttered, "started for my own protection. She's worse than you think." "How bad?" I asked. His laugh was a jagged thing. "She calls it her hobby, destroying people." And Whitaker. "He's not just backing her plays, he's bankrolling them through shell LLCs tied to resort developers. Every foreclosure, every lien, they split the profits. He leaned closer, voice breaking. Ethan, your father didn't die from stress. She poisoned him. Digitalis in his coffee, said it was her heart attack special, bragged about it after the funeral. The world tilted, then snapped into brutal clarity. My father hadn't just lost a battle. He'd been executed slowly, deliberately, because he dared to stand in the way. For a long moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Then I closed my fist around the flash drive like a promise carved in bone. You just signed her death warrant, I said quietly, figuratively speaking. Robert's eyes met mine, haunted and desperate. Just get me out. Immunity, witness protection, whatever it takes. I can give you everything. But if she finds out, she won't, I cut in. By the time she realizes what's happening, the walls will already be gone. As Robert vanished into the night, I slid the flash drive into my pocket and stared at the courthouse steps glowing under sodium lights. Tomorrow Whitaker would try to bury me under legal rubble. But thanks to Robert, I had a bomb big enough to level his whole empire. And for the first time since this war began, I wasn't just fighting to keep my land. I was fighting for my father's name, and I intended to win. By dawn, the rain started a slow, steady drizzle that turned the red clay roads into ribbons of mud. It should have felt cleansing. Instead, it tasted like war. I spent the early hours combing through Robert's flash drive. Dozens of audio files, hundreds of documents, spreadsheets that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. And the recordings. They weren't just damning, they were apocalyptic. Randall Victoria's voice purred through the speakers in one late-night call. We've got the Barrett family cornered. Another 2 fines and they'll fold. Tell your developer friends to have the LLC ready. Same routing scheme as last time. Then Whitaker's gravel baritone, of course. And make sure the invoices look legit. No repeats of the Bradley mess. Every word tighten the noose. RICO violations, wire fraud, judicial corruption, and layered under it all a casual cruelty that made my stomach turn. By the time the sun broke through the storm clouds, my kitchen looked like a war room, laptops humming, evidence charts covering every surface. Elena joined via video call, her hair a frizzed halo of righteous fury. Ethan, she said, eyes flicking over the documents I held up to the camera. This isn't just HOA harassment. This is a criminal syndicate. With Robert's testimony and these files, we've got enough for federal charges. Racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, you name it. And the murder, I asked, voice low. Elena's jaw tightened. We need corroboration beyond the audio brag. Physical evidence would nail it. But even without that, she's done. They both are. I exhaled slowly. Victory glimmered on the horizon, but I knew better than to celebrate early. People like Victoria don't surrender. They scorch earth, and scorch she did. The first hit came at 8:42 a.m., a process server at my gate with an injunction thicker than a Bible. Emergency order signed by Judge Whitaker himself, declaring my property an imminent environmental hazard. Alleged septic failure, groundwater contamination, immediate condemnation hearing scheduled for tomorrow. Whitaker wasn't just playing defense. He was going nuclear. My phone rang before the dust settled. Elena again. Ethan, they've moved faster than I expected, but we can counter. File for a federal venue change diversity jurisdiction. Pull it out of Whitaker's backyard before he buries you. I'll handle it, I said, already drafting the petition. But as I typed, another blow landed. My accounts were still frozen this time under suspicion of financial impropriety. Cute trick courtesy of Whitaker's banking buddies. They were trying to starve me out before the real fight began. Unfortunately for them, I'd spent 15 years playing chess with sharks. I opened my crypto wallet and emergency fund fattened by every consulting gig I'd taken off the books. Enough to fuel a small war, which incidentally was exactly what I planned. First call Marcus Chen, forensic accountant and human scalpel. Marcus had a personal vendetta against dirty money, and he owed me big. Marcus, I said when he answered, I need you to gut the Willow Oaks HOA. Every transaction for the last 5 years. Follow the blood. His chuckle was dark music. Send me access creds and a stiff drink. If there's rot, I'll find it. Second call Davidson, my old boss at the National HOA Oversight Division. I'd walked away from DC for good reasons, but this wasn't about career anymore. It was about war. Ethan, he barked, voice crackling through speakerphone, you were supposed to be on vacation. I said, teeth clenched. Until a power-drunk HOA president and her pet judge tried to steal my land and maybe poison my father. I'm invoking every favor you owe me. Quietly pull Whitaker's record and patch me through to public corruption at FBI. Davison swore under his breath. This is going to make headlines. Good, I said. Let the world watch. By noon, the counterstrike was in motion. Elena filed the venue change and emergency injunction freeze. Marcus started tearing through HOA ledgers like a wolf in a butcher shop. And I went hunting for the final nail. The courthouse smelled like bleach and fear when I walked in, boots tracking mud across polished tile. Clerk at the records desk looked up pale and jittery. Mr. Cross, he stammered. I've been instructed, certain files are sealed. I dropped my badge on the counter, not HOA, not local law, the federal kind that makes bureaucrats sweat through their polyester. Texas Public Information Act, I said evenly. Unless you've got a court order, those records are mine. Now. 5 minutes later, I walked out with a folder thick enough to choke a horse, and inside gold. A decade of foreclosure patterns all pointing to the same scheme: homeowners, squeezed out properties scooped up by LLCs registered to Whitaker's golfing buddies. Some flipped within weeks for 10 times the value. Millions laundered under the banner of community standards. I sent the files to Elena, then pulled into the courthouse lot to breathe for the first time all day. That's when I saw him, Robert Pratt, sitting in a beat-up Chevy, eyes hollow as cave glass. He rolled down the window as I approached. I can't keep living like this, he muttered, voice raw. The lies, the threats. You know what she told me last night? If this goes south, I'm taking the fall. Not her. Me. You won't, I said, leaning on the door. You're getting out. Immunity, relocation, the works. But I need everything, Robert. Hard copies, safe codes, the works. He nodded, shoving a second flash drive into my hand. Then his voice dropped to a whisper that scraped bone. There's something else about your father. It wasn't stress, Ethan. It was murder. She called it her heart attack cocktail. Digitalis in his coffee whenever he came to meetings. Said no one ever questions a bad ticker. The air left my lungs in a rush like a punch to the ribs. I'd suspected. God help me, I'd suspected. But hearing it confirmed. That lit something primal in my chest, hot and blinding. For a long moment, I just stared at Robert, the weight of the flash drive burning in my palm. Then I smiled. Slow, sharp. Robert, I said, you just handed me the warhead. By nightfall, I had every piece I needed. Proof of corruption, proof of conspiracy, and the seeds of a murder charge that would send Whitaker and Victoria to rot in adjoining cells. Tomorrow's hearing wasn't just going to be a defense. It was going to be an execution. I barely slept. Not from fear, those days were long behind me, but from the coiled energy of inevitability. Tomorrow wasn't a hearing. It was Judgment Day. The farmhouse creaked in the midnight wind, like an old war veteran whispering stories. I sat at my grandfather's desk, the same one he'd used to write letters to county commissioners when Whitaker's ilk first tried this stunt decades ago. Back then, they called it progress. Now they called it community development. Funny how the language changes, but the rot stays the same. For 15 years, I'd been dismantling HOA corruption from a safe, sterile distance, conference room subpoenas, depositions. But this was personal. My name, my blood. My father's grave on a hill overlooking a battlefield disguised as suburbia. Somewhere between my third cup of black coffee and my 50th reread of Robert's files, a truth hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about saving a ranch. It was about drawing a line, one they'd never cross again. Not here, not anywhere. Morning came sharp and bright, as if the universe wanted maximum visibility for the carnage to come. The Willow Oaks Community Center looked like the set of a bad daytime drama, folding chairs, packed shoulder to shoulder, tension hanging heavier than Georgia humidity. At the front, Victoria, dressed for triumph in a scarlet blazer, flanked by her board, and of course, the Honorable Judge, Randall Whitaker himself. The sight of him turned my stomach. Black robe, silver hair, that smug half-smile judges practice in mirrors. A man who'd traded justice for influence and slept like a baby ever since. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria began, voice dripping sweet venom. Thank you for attending this emergency session. As you know, Mr. Ethan Cross has repeatedly violated our community standards, endangered public health, and harassed board members. We are left with no choice but to vote on immediate liens and a recommendation for county condemnation. Polite applause from her loyalists. Nervous glances from the rest. I waited until she clicked to her next slide, a badly photoshopped image of my property, spewing green sludge before standing. My boots echoed like gunshots as I strode down the center aisle, a folder in one hand and something sharper in my smile. Fascinating presentation, Victoria, I said, letting my voice carry. Though I notice you skipped a few key points, like the part where your husband trespassed on my land at 3:12 a.m. to poison my grandmother's rose garden. A ripple tore through the room. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of folding chairs. Victoria froze, knuckles whitening on the podium. That's a lie, she spat, recovering fast. He was home all night. Really, I tapped my phone. The speakers crackled to life, filling the hall with her voice. Remember Robert, just the old roses. And wear the shoes I left. 2 sizes bigger. No mistakes. Pandemonium. Someone shouted, "Play it again." Another yelled, "I knew it." Victoria slammed the gavel hard enough to splinter wood. This is inadmissible. He's using illegal surveillance. Funny you care about legality? Now I cut in, stepping closer. But since we're on the topic, let's talk about these. I opened the folder, fanning out foreclosure records like a magician revealing his final trick. 23 families. Forced out under bogus violations. Properties sold to LLCs tied to Whitaker's golf buddies. Millions skimmed under the guise of HOA enforcement. Whitaker rose slowly, voice oily as a spill. "Mr. Cross, this forum is not the place." "Sit down, Judge," I snapped the word, cracking like a whip. "You lost the right to lecture anyone about forums the moment you started laundering HOA funds through shell corporations." The room went dead silent. You could feel the tectonic plates shifting, neighbors seeing the truth in real time. "Lies, Victoria," hissed, eyes glittering like broken glass. "All lies. You think you can smear me with your government tricks? I run this community. These people trust me." I smiled, slow and lethal. "Do they?" I hit play on the second clip. Her voice again slurred, drunk and dripping malice. "Randall, if he doesn't fold, we'll kill the deal like we killed his daddy." Little digitalis in the coffee poof. Heart just gives out. You could have heard a feather drop. Linda Barrett shot to her feet, voice shaking with rage. "You murdered him." The room erupted, shouts, curses, phones recording from every angle. Whitaker's face had gone corpse white, sweat darkening the collar of his robe. "That's enough," he thundered, but it was too late. 2 figures strode in from the back, FBI windbreakers, flashing blue letters that silenced the chaos like a gunshot. Randall Whitaker, Victoria Pratt, the lead agent, barked, voice flat as concrete. "You're under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." Gasps turned to cheers. Some neighbors cried. Others filmed like it was Christmas morning. As agents cuffed her, Victoria twisted toward me, eyes spitting venom. "You think you've won. This isn't over." I stepped close enough for her perfume to sting. "Oh, it's over," I said softly. "But prison, that's forever." The gavel came down one last time, not in Victoria's hand, but in federal court 2 weeks later. Full indictments, asset seizures, every lien voided, every stolen home ordered returned. But the real transformation wasn't in the courtroom. It was in me. For years, I'd treated my work like triage, patching wounds in a system too rotten to heal. Now I saw the truth. Change doesn't start in marble halls. It starts on porches and living rooms in neighborhoods like this. The fight had always been personal. I just hadn't known how personal until now. And as I stood on the porch that night, watching neighbors celebrate under strings of borrowed Christmas lights, I realized something else. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 6 weeks later, the old farmhouse looked different, not because of fresh paint or the repaired porch steps, but because of the laughter rolling through its walls, the kind that comes when fear finally loosens its grip. The Willow Oaks HOA was officially dissolved, its assets seized and funneled into restitution funds. Families who had been driven out were returning, some to reclaim their homes, others just to see justice bloom, where corruption once rooted deep. In Victoria Pratt. Last I heard, she was adjusting to life in a federal holding facility, her scarlet blazers traded for an orange jumpsuit and her gavel for a plastic tray. Whitaker was 2 cells down, stripped of his robe, his name trending on every legal blog as a cautionary tale. It should have felt like enough. Hell, it should have felt like victory. But as I stood in the yard that evening, the Georgia sun bleeding orange across the horizon, I realized something. What happened here wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom. One HOA in one county, one judge in one state. Multiply that by thousands and you've got a silent empire feeding on fear and apathy. And that couldn't stand. I locked the farmhouse door and crossed the gravel drive to the property across the street, the one that used to be Victoria's fortress, her command center. Now its windows glowed warm and open laughter spilling out as neighbors hauled in folding tables, stacks of paper, and laptops. Ethan Linda waved me over, cheeks flushed with purpose. "You ready for round two?" I grinned, stepping inside to the smell of coffee and something sweet baking in the kitchen. The living room had transformed into a war room for good, a whiteboard scrawled with plans, legal resources stacked in neat rows, a banner strung across the mantel, the Willow Oaks Community Resource Center. Dorothy stood at the center, hands on her hips like a general surveying troops. Legal clinics every Thursday, she announced, ticking items off a list. HOA education workshops starting next week. And someone suggested a lending library for lawn tools. Imagine neighbors helping neighbors instead of suing them. The cheer that followed rattled the picture frames. I wandered to the back porch where the air smelled like rain-soaked earth and second chances. Beyond the yard, the rose garden was coming back to life, tiny green shoots pushing stubbornly through soil we'd worked like surgeons. Dorothy had called it an exorcism of negativity when we replanted, and maybe she was right. Because this wasn't just about rebuilding a garden. It was about rewriting a culture. Later that night, after the meeting broke up and the laughter faded into the hum of summer insects, I sat alone beneath the string lights, scrolling through messages on my phone. A ping from Elena. DOJ approved expanded funding for your division. They want you to lead the national task force. Interested, I stared at the screen for a long moment, bourbon warm in my hand. The old me, the bureaucrat chained to a DC office, would have jumped at it. But now I saw something bigger than titles or pay grades. I typed back yes, but on one condition: I work remote, got a ranch to run, and a community to protect. Her reply came fast: deal. And Ethan, what you did here, it's going to change everything. I set the phone down and let that sink in. Not as a compliment, but as a responsibility. Because for every Willow Oaks, there were 100 more waiting for someone to fight back. And if that someone had to be me, so be it. The last text came just before midnight. Unknown number. My pulse jumped before I even opened it. Old reflex. Mr. Cross, my name's Patricia, HOA president in Colorado. We've got a situation. I heard what you did in Georgia. Please. We need help. I laughed softly into the dark, the kind of laugh that carries both exhaustion and purpose. Then I typed 2 words: send details. Because Dorothy was right, the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. Building something stronger than the fear that tried to break you. Tomorrow I'd start planning my trip to Colorado. But tonight I sat under the stars, the scent of new roses curling through the night, and thought about my father, about the promise I'd kept. We got them, Dad, all of them. And I wasn't done yet. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, in bylaws, in board meetings, in people who smile while stealing everything you love. That's the danger of complacency. We assume the rules protect us until someone weaponizes those rules against us. What I learned in Willow Oaks is simple, but brutal: silence is the accomplice of tyranny. Every neighbor who shrugged, every official who looked away, made Victoria stronger. And every voice that finally spoke up helped dismantle her empire. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Corruption thrives where accountability dies. It doesn't matter if it's a homeowners association or a courthouse. When good people stay quiet, bad ones write the script. The flip side: courage is contagious. One person takes a stand, then another, and suddenly the system that looked invincible starts to crack. It's never easy, it's never fast, but it's always worth it. Because the alternative, the slow death of freedom, inch by inch behind manicured lawns, isn't living at all. If you're watching this and thinking, that could never happen here, think again. HOA abuse is real. Corruption is real. And the only way to stop it is to know your rights and use them. Start by reading your governing documents. Know the difference between a violation and intimidation. Document everything, photos, emails, timestamps. If your gut says something's off, trust it. And don't fight alone. Build alliances with your neighbors. Corruption loves isolation. It hates community. If the system's stacked against you, bring in outside help, media attorneys, even state agencies. You don't need a badge or a law degree to make change. You just need persistence and the courage to say, not here, not today. If you found this story powerful, share it because someone out there is living their own HOA nightmare right now. Drop a comment with your city, your story, or just a word of support for those in the fight. And if you want more true stories of everyday people taking back power, subscribe now because the war for fairness isn't over.